we were surprised, but God's not surprised.
That's right.
And I think there is a sense for me always in this moment that, and having seen my own church go through a pastoral transition, right, where I helped found the church, that you do have to focus on the continued work of God, the faithfulness, the love of God, and also the assurance that he has not only someone in mind, but they're gonna have their own gifts. They're going to have their own way of entering into the chapters of ministry of Calvin Theological Seminary.
You're listening to the Forum Podcast, a production of Calvin Theological Seminary.
Thank you, all three of you, for taking the time this afternoon to come on the Forum Podcast. We really appreciate your wisdom, your leadership, and your gift of time for this afternoon. Neal Plantinga, Jul Medenblik, Jim De Jong, all three former, soon to be former, in the transition stages of handing over leadership of the seminary. And my first question really was, and maybe Jim, we'll start with you. What prepared you, or what was your calling to the presidency here? What was that journey like for you?
Unexpected, abbreviated, but challenging and promising.
What was unexpected about it for you?
Well, I had been teaching on the college level for 10 years, and I was entertaining calls into church ministry, which I thought was my real calling. And the Lord shut a couple of doors, and this opened up to my surprise. And after a few months, I walked through it.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Neal? Is that anything?
I was dean of the chapel over at Calvin College, and was approached to put my name forward. I guess I didn't think of myself necessarily as an administrator, more of a teacher. So it was surprising that people were asking me to make myself available, but it was my denomination asking, so I said yes.
And Jul?
By the way, I refer to these two as president number 5 and 6, and I'm 7, if that helps.
Okay.
It helps internally. And I smile in part because really it is all of what they have said in different ways: surprising, unexpected, challenging, following a sense of God's call. For me, I was actually a pastor after being an attorney. I was a church planter in Chicagoland, actually chair of the board, and I received a phone call from President number 6 that he had thought that the fall of particular year was going to be the year that he would announce his impending retirement. And I still remember the 2 questions I asked you, Neal. I don't remember the order, but I did say, have you talked to God about it, and did you talk to your wife? And he said yes to both. Mm-hmm. And this was a phone call received in New Lenox. And then as the work of the board was to set up the search team, and I'm not on the search team, but then I get nominated from a search team that, once again, I had helped set up, but I was not on. And I really was stunned in some ways, because I did not see that I had the academic qualifications for it. But Jackie said specifically, and we'll probably refer to other people again in our lives, but my wife said, just go for it. They'll never choose you. And that's sometimes how God works. He chooses the unlikely, and I'll stand in that account, and have been blessed to be in the role.
Well, it sounds like all three of you had a similar space of unexpectedness to being called into this office. That's a fascinating point. When you arrived, and maybe not right away, but got settled into the role a little bit, what opportunities did you see in front of you that you were excited to take hold of and go run with, so to speak? And whoever wants to speak first.
Well, talk about unexpected. I didn't expect to be a fundraiser. no president had been a fundraiser prior to my tenure. And I was sitting with the president of the college and the public relations people and the finance vice president. And I said, you know, when I sat down with the faculty, they said, we've been asking for student housing for a long time and nothing happens. And so when I sat down with them, I said, we need student housing. And they said, well, if you want student housing, go raise the money for it. So I did. And that started a new venture, something that I didn't expect. But it was very rewarding because meeting with dedicated donors is a spiritually exciting, humbling, moving experience.
Amen.
And I had a lot of that.
That's not something that would come to mind for, I think, a general audience, those descriptive words. Can you unpack that a little bit? What was spiritually rewarding in that?
Well, when you talk about the vision of the seminary and what it needs, it resonates with people who are in tune with you and with the Lord. And that's a very affirming experience. And so we ended up talking more spiritually about the meaning of theology and preaching in the seminary than we did about money. That was very secondary, I found.
I would add to that, I think, in fact, Jim, you once mentioned this to me, that when you encounter Christians who have prospered, especially in business, you're often delighted to discover that they have a pretty thoroughly thought out Christian philosophy of business. They're not just business people, they are Christians who are in business, and they've thought that all through.
And maybe just to add to that, in terms of that story continues to this day. To what Jim was referring to, I've gone back to some notes. In the early 1980s, ministry shares, the quota system of the Christian Reformed Church, was 90% of the budget of the seminary. It's only until 1991, where there's a separation of then the Calvin College and Calvin Seminary, that actually the job description got changed specifically to include fundraising. And Jim took that on. Neal and I, we both had different roles related. I sometimes put it that I know I became an extra pastor, an additional pastor for many of those people. And sometimes the type of pastor that they would not talk to their, if I'll call it regular pastor, about their generational wealth plans, their stewardship they hope to have. They still wanted to make an impact. They asked you what was the potential for some of the things that you were looking at. But the vision conversations about what we hope to do at the seminary and what it means to where we've been over these last and now 150 years, that's what precedes all those requests. Sometimes they say it this way: how long does it take to ask for $1 million? Well, it takes about 10 seconds. If you want a successful $1 million ask, it might take 10 years because you're building relationship first.
What are some of the pieces, you mentioned student housing, what are some of the pieces that brought together that fundraising plus the vision of the seminary that you would be proud of to see to this day, like student housing again with you, Jul, but are there other pieces or elements that you saw during your tenures that you would lift up and say, this is a prime example of what we're talking about?
Well, I think degree programs are important, and you always had your eye out for potential faculty members, and that in itself finding them brought its own sense of gratification and sometimes surprise, but that was very rewarding. And when I started, the seminary had already embarked on multicultural education. We had centers in Chicago and Rehoboth, New Mexico, and among Asians, especially Koreans, in Los Angeles, and that was very satisfying and rewarding. And that was part of the changing culture in the church, but also in the seminary and on the faculty.
Was the PhD program during
Jim.
your tenure?
Jim's time.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim's.
So
Yeah.
that was
Well,
it.
it was, we had some interesting conversations in the faculty, and Neal was on the faculty at that time. And when we broached the subject, there was some hesitation, but then there was virtually unanimous
Yeah.
interest in pursuing it. And we defined the program. We did some research on feasibility, and the lights were green, and so we proceeded. And there was fundraising involved in that too. And the Lord opened those doors. Very satisfying.
I point to that time as really one of the key turning points for us being a global community, learning. Not that we didn't have that before, and you referenced that, but I know that you specifically and the faculty were looking to have whatever applicant pool comes, that at least maybe 50% sometimes of the 4 students.
Well,
So
we
two.
defined it as 50%. We
So
said
50.
explicitly as a faculty, this is a global enterprise. 50% of the admissions in the PhD program will be from overseas,
That's
it's-
still part of the DNA, so we
Well,
have a
good.
surprising 50-some Koreans, for example.
Yeah.
And yesterday was a day, when we're recording here, that number of people got their PhD invitation letters to join the program.
I would say that a place where almost immediately the interests of donors and the interests of the church came together for me was in doing something to help preachers. Preachers have a very high hill to climb every Sunday. They have to preach to a mixed audience about things of final magnificence, and they have to do it in a way that's engaging, that will take. That's really hard to do. So a number of us who were in the leadership positions at the time that I became president thought that we would like to establish some kind of programming at the seminary that would help preachers Sunday by Sunday. And I found it was the easiest money to raise that I had. Everybody wants better preaching. And when I would talk to donors about this, it got them excited. The sermon is still the ministry event that brings most of the church together for most of the time. It's the place where the church's ministry gets most exposure week by week. And to have a preacher who is thoroughly based in our community book, who really knows the Bible, but who also knows how to speak from it deeply and beautifully, that's an amazing thing, and it generates eventful preaching. So a number of us got together and thought, well, we're going to get the Center for Excellence in Preaching started, and I think it's been a blessing.
Jul?
This moment reminds me of the first time I actually chaired a faculty meeting. So I was down in the faculty before, and so I come in as president, and there was even an option whether or not I was going to chair, but I said, oh, I think I can chair meetings, so let's do that. And I think it was because you approved the minutes of the previous meetings as part of the process, and I think it was minute number 9,732, some number like that. And I was a church planner, and I was there at minute number 1. So coming at 9,732, you realize you're joining a conversation. So the PhD program has got to be supported, encouraged, Center for Excellence in Preaching, student housing. But I thought in terms of my time and looking back, continued the journey of what it means to be affordable, so raising scholarships, but also accessible theological training. So that's whether development certificates or adding a doctorate, but especially in the first year or two was about, can we move to online education? So it might be called distance education or distributed education, and particularly starting with the MA and MDiv programs. Could we help students, prospective students who would love to come to Calvin Seminary? I moved from Florida to Grand Rapids, Michigan as part of my journey, but for whatever reasons, that's not happening as much. And so as a seminary who could touch people where they were, so they could live, work, and minister already where they are and still receive a Calvin Seminary education. So I'm just grateful for the team that developed and some of the people, once again, who are part of that edging into it. And it did include dollars and saying, we'll support this and see the value of that. And now 40% of our student body is in the distance program.
40%.
That's amazing.
Wow.
So it is amazing.
But there were edges
Yeah.
of this from your times as well. I meet with a former board member, Ted Gradanis, who talks about education and, using computers. And, Neal, part of this was even when I was on the board and you were a president. And what are we going to do when we see that there's so many CRC, particularly at that point, prospective students who just for whatever reasons are not coming to Calvin Seminary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I raised that question with some colleagues who will remain unnamed, they resisted.
They're going to be the edited version somewhere else.
It was going on at Western Seminary and other places, and I said, we ought to get with it. And they said, no, face-to-face education, that's where it's at. That's what's got to happen.
It may be that that's still best. It may be.
Yeah.
It may be.
And it may
But-
be for some people specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to. But is a strong word. I'd love to hear the rest of that sentence.
Well, I think that a lot of important meaning is generated through witnessing not only professors, but also other students' body language, their facial expressions, their tone of voice. There's something about a group dynamic that is educationally strong. I guess I think that face-to-face education has some advantages like that. But what Jim said is absolutely true, and what Jul reinforced, that for some students it's simply impossible. The seminary then has to adapt, has to make seminary education available online, and it can be done in a way that's very, very fine. So I'm glad that the seminary has gotten into this program and done it. It started pretty strongly in about 2005, and by 2007, 2008, we had degree programs going where students could study for a Calvin degree off-site and then come in cohorts a couple of times a year. I think it's been a blessing.
I would agree, and even today, you still have them come in face-to-face for some of their program, don't you?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
like I still remember my first intensive, the MDiv was 12 students, and they call themselves guinea pigs. I call them trailblazers. And at the end of their week together here, it was almost like I'll call it the Youth Unlimited conventions I grew up with,
Okay.
where at the end there'd be hug lines.
Oh.
They did not leave each other by just a wave. They left by engaging each other, maybe saying a prayer over one person or giving a hug as it was appropriate. And that intense experience continues today, so that's almost like a camp experience, and they turn toward each other and have deep relationships. And some of the surveys say that some of our students would say that's even a deeper experience than what I might have experienced just coming
Yeah.
and going, because there's a focus to that time.
It's an intentional time.
Yeah, it's
together.
an
I think
intensive.
That certainly reinforces what Neal emphasized.
Yes.
One of the best things Jim did was to build the student center here at the seminary. And it always reminded me that a good deal of seminary education is extracurricular. It happens when students get together and talk about what's been going on in their classes, what's been going on in chapel. And to have a commodious, beautiful place to do this, an attractive place where they want to be, is a very important part of the educational process here.
And we still have a focus on that, as we all have had in our times. So after COVID, which was a separate time, in so many deep and harmful ways, to be able to partner with really a foundation out of New York, Grace and Mercy Foundation, for the public reading of Scripture here on Tuesdays, so that you get faculty, staff, and students coming together. They hear Scripture for basically about a half hour, and then, yes, we eat together. And so, to your point, because we have the Student Center, because we have the opportunities to connect with other people who want to support this work, we can have a setting where every week we're drawn together and eat together, pray together, and hear God's Word together.
So shifting gears a little bit, but a little bit back to something you brought up, Jul, minute 9,700 and...
I'm probably wrong on it, but it's in the 9,000s, I can assure you of that.
So when you look at a place that has 9,700 minutes,
Right.
that's a deeply rooted institution built on a long tradition. How, as presidents, did you keep that contextual and relevant for the context in your times?
What a great question.
Well, I think we had the privilege and the obligation to maintain a confessional continuity and commitment. And I think that is a big part of the cohesiveness. I think denominational identity was too, but boy, that has faded.
Yeah.
That has faded. But the confessional commitment, I think, was a big part of it.
And I think Calvin Seminary has always been known for taking the study of Bible, theology, history very seriously. We want students to be educated. We believe in an educated clergy. That has been a prominent conviction in this institution for decades. And I think that, whatever else we may have wanted to do, we never wanted to lose that students would be able to read the Bible deeply, that they would be able to think about it to a broad and effective extent in theology, that they would know the history of the church, the history of missions, that they would have wonderful instruction in pastoral care. All of this requires real intellectual vigor and sharp attention. And Calvin Seminary has been known for this for many decades, and it's something we must never lose.
There is an interesting dynamic when you go out and say that you're representing Calvin Theological Seminary. There's not that many seminaries that are 150 years old in the Reformed traditions, where, Westerns has 10 more years on it, for example. But I sometimes go back to the very beginning. It was one pastor helping to train 5-7 students for the goal of ministry, to support the local churches. We're called to serve the church as it serves the mission of God. And there's a way that we think about that church and that context in what we've been doing over the last 150 years. There's also a way that we say we need to do it within the wider Christian tradition and understand what is going on in those areas of conversation. And so there's an academic integrity and rigor that's there. So when I go to Korea, they recognize the academic rigor, and then they'll say things like this: but we think Calvin Seminary is also kind. And by that they mean we have a food pantry and clothes pantry. We have a hospitable student center. We have other ways that we connect with our students, so that we're not just training brains on sticks, as Jamie Smith has talked about. We are training whole people in terms of their head, their heart, their practice. And that's been ongoing for 150 years. Now, there might be nuances of what we do about that, but to what Jim said at the very beginning, confessionally connected and rooted, but also with an eye to what's going on in the world, but always the mind that this is about serving the church in both areas, in terms of academics and scholarship, but also in terms of the context to which we serve.
I think one of the things that really helped ensure the continuity that Neal was talking about is so important are the publications that have been part of the tradition. I mean, I think of the Dutch Gereformeerd Amerikaan, the Reformed American journal back in the turn of the 19th or 20th century. I think of a couple of not competing but alternative journals that fostered dialogue in the 1920s and 30s. I think of the old Calvin Seminary Forum. I resurrected that term, Calvin Forum, because I wanted to recapture some of the spirit of a journal that was very prominent and important in the 30s and 40s. And I think that continued in the 50s and 60s, and the Reformed Journal is a notable contribution to that. And the Calvin Theological Journal was born in the 60s, which contributed to that. And I think that those journals, that journal tradition, and a lot of it, most of it was contributed by Calvin Seminary professors. But that reinforced what Neal was talking about.
In fact, if you just take the forum issues by issue, for your time, Neal's time, my time, and as we just talked before we started taping, that now this is a podcast that will be turned into an article, but there's a consistency about making sure we share with the church, from our faculty especially, about what ways to think about the world and our place in it.
How did you see God's faithfulness during your time in light of this continuity, this effort for your faithfulness, and how did you see God's faithfulness in return?
Well, one thing I would say is that for a seminary that had always prized intellectual rigor, I found that when a number of us said, that's important, we must never lose it, it's been one of our hallmarks, but it needs to be deliberately focused toward ministry. It can't be abstract. It can't be merely intellectual. It can't be merely academic. This is a school for the church. And I found God's faithfulness in the fact that faculty who were terrific in their disciplines were sympathetic to this and understood that we needed to constantly remind ourselves that we are educating students for ministry, and that our history, our theology, our Bible had to be deliberately shaped to help students minister better. So one of the things, when I was president, one of the things we did for a while at least was when students were being oriented to their seminary education, we would have good preachers come in, preach a sermon for the students, and then tell them what parts of their seminary education they needed in order to be able to preach that sermon. So students could see going in that their coursework was going to have a very practical benefit and outcome. And I think that was important for them to see.
I think part of the faithfulness I would mark at this moment was I've been privileged to be in some ways a transition. All of us have in some ways, but I came in and there were still people on the faculty who were my teachers and had the privilege of walking them through those last years and sometimes having a last lecture and capturing some of their thoughts for that moment, and then seeing new faculty come in who in some ways are taking a baton from that. So I saw faithfulness of God in those who've served and those who are now serving. I saw it also related to the conversations I've had. I entered into conversations with, let's say, supporters of the Calvin community and Calvin Seminary specifically, and they would recall stories about Jim and visiting them, or Neal going out to Central Valley of California, and here I am. And the fact is that they went there first was helpful for me when I went. And we should anticipate President number 8 and the fact that that person will be privileged to enter in those conversations with not just individuals, but sometimes now families. I can remember specific family members who once again have gone to glory, and I'm talking now to their son or their daughter, or even some places grandson and granddaughter. So the faithfulness of a supportive community was something I found and continue to find. And God himself isn't faithful. We all had, I'm sure, if you really want to have an episode 2 of people like, where did you file all those letters that you didn't want to read, and now emails that come or other things that might come. And I'll never forget a moment where Jim De Jong talked to my mother. My mother, this is about when I'm getting installed and inaugurated as president, and she's very nervous because she thinks already pastors get sometimes a lot of things written about them or to them. And you specifically, Jim, commented to my mother that you will find, Jul, you said to my mother, he'll find supporters, he'll find encouragers, he'll find people in that. And I think all 3 of us would testify there are people who came alongside each of us to do the work we do. And we're not going to publicize their names here, but we are so grateful to God for those people. And thanks again for your words to my mother.
Yeah, I think any pastor of a church, any leader of a Christian institution like Calvin Seminary, is going to have to absorb a certain amount of criticism, a certain amount of pain. Sometimes your calling is to suffer for a while. And I think it's important that during those times you never lose hold of your faith in Jesus Christ, who suffered for us, and that we share a little in his sufferings is spiritually very important. So I think every leader of a Christian institution is called at some point to suffer and cannot expect to evade it and must simply minister right through it.
Well said, well said.
Very much so. If I could add just a little bit to that, partly because when I thought and prayed about this conversation, I also saw that there were people, and we could name these people who really were there for us. Jerry Kuiper, Mary Brasser, and Carolyn Danute. They are our executive associates. There's our category or title you gave, but we are just blessed with not only them, but so many others. But I can remember, what was it, Neal? What did you used to say about Mary Brasser?
I said about Mary Brasser, who was right in the office there with me for 10 years. She was so wise that if she ever said to me, Neal, are you sure you want to do that? I would say, not anymore.
They ran a lot of interference for us.
Yeah.
And deflected a lot of that criticism. They are very smart and valuable colleagues.
It'll be interesting to get them at a table like this. So, but absolutely, we're grateful for people like them, but especially them.
I'm glad you mentioned them, Jul. They were so important.
When you think of the suffering, on the other side of that is the growth and the beauty and the reward that comes from that suffering. Is there something each of you would care to share of maybe a story or a highlight in that light of suffering with Christ and this reward that is a foretaste that you were able to experience during your time?
You said care to share.
Yeah.
Some things are not not for public.
I'm a guy who always looked at the glass as half full.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went through tough times or tough days, I took time to reflect on the good things I had going on at the same time. And I got a lot of mileage out of that. That was very helpful. And I said, I've read, Neal has a wonderful book that has come out recently on gratitude. And I found that emphasizing what we have that is a blessing and a challenge and a meaningful opportunity, and being grateful for that in times like that, I mean, transcended all of the negative stuff. And there wasn't a lot of negative stuff as I reflect. And that was very helpful to me.
I think that's a really important emphasis, Jim. You can choose what to focus on. You can choose to focus on things that hurt and that are negative, or you can choose to focus on things that are a blessing and are positive. You have a certain amount of control over what you choose to focus on. There are lots of homely examples that anybody can understand. I may not so much appreciate having to clear my gutters of leaves before winter, but the fact that I have gutters and leaves in them mean I have a roof over my head, and I am grateful for that. I may not appreciate having to clean up after a Thanksgiving dinner, but having to clean up means I had loved ones at a table with me to enjoy God's good gifts, and I'm grateful for that. You can choose what aspect of a situation you want to home in on, and that's an important choice.
And in terms of this category, I'm a glass half full, maybe even a little more than that sometimes. But to what you both have been speaking about is to understanding that if there are those times where we feel like there is that sense of suffering, and there is, we should also recognize there's been suffering for our families, times away. Appreciate again our spouses in deep ways for what they gave in terms of this ministry. But I'll never forget, even just last year, it was separate from any other conversations. Jackie just turned to me and said, wow, we are really blessed. And it became really a defining kind of moment in our conversation where we were at, thinking through, again, the blessings that we have. What do you want to focus on? What are the opportunities that God has brought you? That is very much a privilege. There are not too many people in this world who can say they were presidents of Calvin Theological Seminary, and you have them right here. And what a privilege it was, and in some ways, I know it still is we think of them as president emeritus and distinguished alumni. But this sense of blessing related to the fact that it's, again, the surprising call of God in our lives to be placed in these unique situations and settings and conversations. And God is the one who designed that. He's going to see us through. And there's a way I think of the word perseverance. In a way, I mean, we tie it to perseverance of the saints, but I think there's a perseverance to your calling as well. We all have trained people, and we say from the very beginning, you need to be in deep touch and rooted to your calling, because the circumstances of life will come and bring you pressure and make you want to maybe even give up your calling. But when you're secure in your calling, because God has secured it, what a blessing.
What have been some of those blessings? I still want an example from each of you. What has been the fruit, the glass half full, that you have a roof and you have gutters? What has been that in your tenure?
I would say one of the things that I noted with real gratitude is that over the years, from 2001 to 2011, the presence of women in the seminary programming became easier and easier for the whole seminary, including men, to accept. Early on, when I was president, it was clear that we had not only women in our program, we had men who thought those women shouldn't be there in our program. And we had to find some way of accommodating both groups in their convictions in a way that was mutually respectful and hospitable. So we would hold town hall meetings in which women would speak about how they sometimes felt second-rated or excluded or diminished. And men who were convinced that the ministry was open only to men would speak about how the presence of women in the MDiv program created conflicts in them. They loved these women as their classmates, but were convinced that they should not be in this program. How do we live together? How do we respect each other? I will testify that I think I saw over 10 years real growth in this area, and that it was a great blessing.
Well, I had the same experience. I can remember they were the two opinions were held so tightly in my tenure, about maybe 10 years into my tenure, that they were really combative with each other. And I finally called them into my office, both groups, and I just gave them the old uncle's talk. And I said, look, this is, you've got to learn to live with each other, and there's something deeper at stake here, and you should think about that. And I saw some improvement in that era as well. But one of the things I was very grateful for is I started a book club in the early 90s for area lay people, business people. And I didn't want any ministers in that group. And about the second or third meeting, one of the men said to me, we used to walk around this building because we were afraid to walk through it. We thought it was holy ground. And I felt so affirmed by the fact that they felt comfortable with being here and being identified with the seminary and sitting in easy chairs and talking about valuable things in their spiritual lives. And that was a very gratifying experience for me, and I think for them as well, and for me because it was for them a gratifying experience.
I think when you ask the question about fruit, I think we're not thinking necessarily about our lives, we're thinking about the lives of others. We've heard in terms of the community, and bring in how business people would look at the seminary or women in ministry. And on that score, one of the things we track is percentage of women in our student population. It's gone from 18% when I began, which is from Neal's time, to 30%. Are there still conversations? Yes. Do we still have to do, I don't call it an uncle talk, but we do have a document called Life Together, which basically says, treat each other as Christ would want you to treat each other, and call each other to that sort of kind of understanding in deep ways about what it means to see each other as image bearers of God, first of all. And then, yes, maybe on a different calling than you are. But what I would mark here at this kind of 15-year mark is that there are ebbs and flows in communities always. I think this 150th year is a reminder of our calling to the church again, but also the calling to each other. What can divide a community? It takes very little, to be honest with you. Satan has many tools of how we do that. But there takes the work of the Spirit in our lives and in our community, so that we, for example, don't have here's our U.S. community, and here's our Canadian community, and here's our global church community. We see each other as all part of the one church and how we might interact with each other. So one of the joys I have of our new building is seeing these 46 units and seeing people mix together and how they walk across from campus and how we see cultures come and mix together. And again, this is not a new story. When I was a student here and we had lived in Sigma, we had what they call the progressive dinners, where you would eat different food from different cultures. But I think it's got to go moving beyond the kitchen into other places.
Although where cultures are concerned, kitchens are pretty important.
They are, and if we really want to be honest this time, food has been a basic around Calvin Seminary for a lot of years. So garden during your time, I know, and others, yeah.
Well, the Koreans in the era of my tenure had a very cohesive group, and they used, every Friday night it was the whole Korean community would gather in the coffee shop and have dinner together, and I'd sit in my office working and I'd hear them singing hymns, and that was a very moving and gratifying experience for me to know that they had that kind of cohesiveness and joy in each other's presence. Yeah.
Well, I think all three of us who, because of our position, traveled in Korea and dealt with Korean Presbyterians and were in Korean homes, came to understand that one of the most delightful things about Korean culture is Korean food. It's wonderful. There are restaurants in Korea in which you sit at low tables, and in the center of the table is a charcoal grill, and the wait person will bring a whole fish and grill that fish right in front of you, and then serve it. It's just terrific.
I like Korean barbecue better, but I agree with you.
Yeah.
I even like kimchi.
Yeah, kimchi.
You have to have a certain tolerance for heat if you're going to eat kimchi.
So how hard is that for Dutch West Michigan folks to get used to?
White kimchi I can do. Okay.
Yeah.
Other parts are not so able.
If you like horseradish mustard, you can probably tolerate some brands of kimchi
Good.
and enjoy them.
So there's been 2 transitions represented at this table. A third is coming for this next president number 8. What encouragement do you have for the CTS community during this time? You've seen God's faithfulness in your time through these transitions. You've seen the community be faithful to the vision and to serving the church. What words of encouragement would you have for the Calvin Theological Seminary community?
I would have the same words of encouragement that the saints in the Bible had when they encountered adversity and wondered how they were ever going to get through it, and then would remind themselves that God delivered his people out of Egypt, that God delivered his people out of exile, that God has a record of faithfulness over centuries, and that a God like this can be counted on to do it again.
The love of God endures forever, and I think you just put your confidence in that. And he knows who the next leader is going to be of Calvin Seminary, and if he knows and is working toward that goal, I have every confidence it'll work out.
We reflected that we were surprised, but God's not surprised.
That's right.
And I think there is a sense for me always in this moment that, and having seen my own church go through a pastoral transition, right, where I helped found the church, that you did have to focus on the continued work of God, the faithfulness, the love of God, and also the assurance that he has not only someone in mind, but they're gonna have their own gifts. They're going to have their own way of entering into the chapters of ministry of Calvin Theological Seminary. There will be continuity. I hope we've displayed that in our conversation, and not just about food or Korea, but a lot of other deep things. But there's also variety that we should enjoy. This is a matter for, once again, seeing that as I say for Jackie and I, our wedding, it's right now 43 years and counting. So God is working on the and counting, and to what Neal already started us with, and you can count on God.
Well, one of the crucial components of this process is the fact that it's a corporate selection process. And we're blessed of being in a covenantal tradition where the family of God really means something, and we have a lot of discernment in our tradition of gifts and select people on the faculty who will examine candidates and make recommendations. We have very discerning and wise, experienced people on the board of trustees who will correct or endorse those decisions. And we have a synodical corporate process, which will then have a selection of that person. And I have a lot of confidence in that kind of diversified but cohesive process, so that we reach a corporate mind on the next person. And so, that just adds to my confidence that we'll find the right person.
Well, wonderful. Is there anything else that's on your hearts to talk about in this space?
Well, since we're in this space, I'll say that one of the joys of being president of Calvin Seminary was the year in which this space turned around. We used to worship that way, toward the east, but there were these windows back here that can let in all this light. And somebody, it wasn't me, somebody got the idea that if we turned this chapel around and made those windows open, there used to be an organ loft there, it would transmit the kind of light into this space that would signify something about the joy we hoped would attend theological education at Calvin Seminary.
But on the other hand, when the pulpit was this way, it was under the cross tower, and that had its own symbolism. And I can live with either, and they're both good.
I helped bring in new chairs, I'll just say that. And the light, but it's a wonderful space, and it was really one of the
Sure
first
is.
spaces when the seminary was built here in this location. So,
Yeah, speaking of God's faithfulness, the vision that led first the college to anticipate Knollcrest Farm as a new campus for Calvin, and then the vision that led Calvin Seminary's leadership to design this building so that, for example, the walkway to this chapel is all open. That was creative. It was anticipatory, and to have the seminary building, right by a pond, a grassy area and a pond. This seminary building is beautifully situated.
it is, and even though each of us had hands in parts of renovations or additions, it continued the same look, the same connectedness, desire for light,
Yep.
desire to be close to the creation, which once again draws us closer to God in many ways. So again, this is a great place that symbolizes, as we've just said, a work of community in this.
It feels like a seminary should feel,
Yeah.
architecturally,
Yeah.
and in its setting.
Yeah. I would say, if I could, kind of nearing this moment, it helps me just to say at the 150th, gratefulness to God for those who've gone before, and you've been introduced to a couple of them. I'm grateful for predecessors, for teachers, for mentors. In some ways, I think that we need to be especially mindful at this 150th that it's not something to be taken for granted. And so thank you for the encouragement, especially that Neal and Jim have given to countless generations, including me.
And thank you for your service. It's been a good era. You've been a fine leader, and I want to thank you for the leadership you've given to Calvin Seminary.
Yeah, when your last day comes, you can look back with real satisfaction.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, the three of you, for taking the time this afternoon. And we appreciate all the leadership and wisdom that you've poured into this place and this community, and anticipate that that's not going to end after this afternoon. And that's a real gift to this community, that you've continued to be present and involved.
Thank you for hosting us today.
Thank you, Philip.